Hello everyone. I'm Professor Raquel Ortega-Giles from City-REDI Institute. I am here hosting another of our seminars from our seminar series. Today we are going to have the presentation of Professor Vicente Royuela and Liliana Cuccu. Professor Vicente Royuela and Liliana, they both work at the Department of Econometrics, Statistics and Applied Economics of the University of Barcelona, and they are part of the ACUAR research group, a member of the Research Institute in Applied, Regional and Public Economics area in the same university. Professor Vicente Royuela is a professor on applied economics at that department, and he is an expert on regional science, urban economics, and socioeconomic development, with a particular interest in on statistical and econometric techniques. He has been a quite active member at the European Regional Science Association. He was the coordinator of the ERSA conference in 2011, I remember very well. He's also an editor-in-chief of the Journal of Regional Research, that is the flagship journal of the Spanish Regional Science Association, and is also an editor of Springer's series, Footprints of Regional Science. He has also been having other editorial roles, such as being the managing editor of Region and the associate editor of Regional Science Policy and Practice. So today they are going to present a paper from the research that Liliana is doing in her PhD, if I know correctly. And it is about robots, job displacement, and job quality. So Vicente, the floor is yours. As I said before, more or less around 35, 40 minutes presentation, if you want to leave some room for questions and comments at the end. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Raquel. Thank you very much for the invitation to the City-REDI Institute seminar series. And I speak instead of Liliana's because of a serious illness problems that she cannot speak. But I would say 70, 80, 90% of the work is hers. So I must rely on her for answering many questions. I am tutoring her thesis dissertation, and the idea is coming from her, let's say, curiosity. The idea is, okay, what happens to workers when they are displaced by robots? This is the topic of the talk, okay? So, we want to know if people are getting worse because they are fired because of robots. So this is the main issue, okay? And the introduction of robots, it's in general good, but some people may be bad. So the title of the paper, it's about that. Just reallocated, robots displacement, and job quality. Okay. So let me start with some motivation. We know that technological progress is good. We know that firms automate and this allows for lower prices or increased quality, etc. And there are two sides of this. One is that, well, because of this displacement in labor, some people will be fired. They will be worse off, but there is an optimistic view. The optimistic view is that human labor is not destroyed by as the energy. Now this is transformed. Well, we can say that this people is reallocated. Clearly, if you're fired because a new machine is substituting your work, okay, you will have to find somewhere else to work, and consequently this displacement effect can be mitigated, and there are some mechanisms and some indirect effects that has been analyzed in the literature, and this is something known already, And in general, there is some evidence supporting this optimistic view that the introduction of automation, robots, artificial intelligence, or any other dimension of this technological progress is good for the entire economy. And although there is some employment losses in manufacturing, at the same time, you can find increases in employment in services, right? Sorry. Still, most of the works are based on empirical evidence coming from aggregate measures, aggregate data. So this is good because it's you can find that in general this is fantastic for the economy, for the country, for the region. But at the same time, because this aggregate outcome can be hiding some positive and negative results, it can derive inappropriate policies and responses. And consequently, it's good not to forget about this, the composition of the employed workers, and that assuming that some losses of some groups can be also present, and if some people is winning, some people is losing, if the aggregate is positive, what do we do with the people on the bad side of the story? So rather than looking at the general impact of robots, the general impact of innovation and structural transformation, we look at from a different perspective. We shift the attention from aggregate employment to workers' level point of view. And we focus only on the losers. We'll look at people who is being fired. And we'll look at people being fired in any sector and people being fired in sectors with high intensity in robots. This is our main perspective, our main strategy. So the research questions we propose are basically two. We look at the quality of this new employment. So you're fired because of robots introduction and you find a new job. So we want to look at not only if you find a new job, which is good, we expect that to happen. Maybe not for everyone, but for most people, they will find a new job. Okay, but what type of new job are they going to find? Well, first we have to think on the displacement. How is the displacement taking place? On the first slide, we can find a firm adopting robots and replacing production, replacing workers by a machine. So what about these workers? Well, maybe they find a new job somewhere else, in a new sector, in a new province, etc. The other possible alternative is that you're fired because your firm did not adapt to the new technologies. So your firm finally needs to close, and then there is a collective dismissal, right? Even though we would like to also look at these two different sides, we don't have the appropriate data to look at collective dismissals, although we have some try in later on. So consequently, we just look at generally if you're fired for whatever reason. Okay, we cannot distinguish between these two alternatives of being displaced by robots adoption. Then you're fired, and once you're fired, you need to find a new job. Well, sometimes it might be hard just to find the same type of job you had previously, because the previous job you were doing, it doesn't exist anymore. Can be the case that there is a shift in labor demand and the type of activity you were doing is not existing. Or B, because there is a geographic mismatch. If you want to do the same task, you should need to migrate. or simply you prefer to stay wherever you are and you opt for sector reallocation. So you move from manufacturing, you want to move to services, yes, but this type of skills, maybe they are not the best, so you cannot adapt that easily. So the first question, the first research question is, does robot exposure increase the probability of being reemployed in a worse job? We look at different outcomes, as we will see later: earnings, employment stability, and skill requirements. So we will try to think on this worse job in many dimensions, quality of job in different ways of different ways. So what about the second? The second research questions looks at the adjustment mechanisms. And this is based on the idea of reallocation. You can reallocate to different ways, sectorally or geographically. From a sectoral point of view, this is good because everyone can benefit from smart people who maybe are fired from manufacturing and they can go to other sectors. But there is a large literature on just demonstrating there are some frictions on reallocating from one sector to another. The second alternative mechanism for reallocation is the geographical one. So moving from one local labor market to another. And well, this spatial flexibility in the labor market is good. So everyone is expected to have a higher welfare because of spatial mobility. So we can expect that people will find a better job wherever else, higher wages. But of course, there might be some shift in labor demand. Maybe in other provinces there was not existing this, or neighboring provinces, there is not existing this type of jobs anymore. And besides, maybe you've also faced some reallocation frictions, right? So after taking care of a lot of data issues, on working with microdata from Social Security records, our findings basically show that in general, middle and low skilled workers tend to be reemployed in jobs with lower quality, lower pay, lower or worse skills, and less stable employment. This is not what we find for high skilled workers. We also find that these negative effects are quite persistent over time, up to 36 months, which is the maximum we look at. And reallocation, in many occasions, offers little to no advantage in many occasions, depending on the type of reallocations, and we will see later. And interestingly, high-skilled workers are much less affected by this exposure to robots and automation. Okay? These are our key findings. So let me start now with the data and the empirical approach we are considering. As for the data, okay, we'll look at Spain. Why should Spain be interesting for British or French or anyone else in the world? Well, first of all, Spain is not Germany. Many of the papers have worked with that already, with some microdata, not from our perspective, but with microdata looking at the impact of robot intensity, has been devoted to Germany. Germany, it's great because they have a lot of robots, but this is a leading country in terms of the introduction of robots in the world. And consequently, Spain is somewhere in the middle. Spain is somewhere here, and it's close to the Netherlands, to Austria, to Italy, even to or to France. So there is a high intensity of robots while not being a leading country in this sense. So maybe we can gain a lot of insights for what's going on from a country such as Spain. And the quality of the data is it's quite good, so we can derive quite a lot of answers from the inspection of this data. Besides, in Spain, work such as this from Koch and co-authors, they have found evidence at the firm level of automation-induced displacement. So they find that when you introduce robots, there is in fact actually the people who is being fired. And finally, we have also found in previous works, work which is recently published in Journal of Real Science with a meta-analysis, what are the mobility patterns of Spaniards. And we actually find that contrary to what many people thought, people is actually moving and is responding to economic factors. They're considering economic factors such as wage or employment opportunities in other provinces. So this is in general quite good for us. So we believe that our outcomes are not only representatives of Spain, but maybe also just have some external validity. We also find, and this is a very nice picture, that I believe that this is taking place in many places in the world. So the blue line is employment share in manufacturing. Manufacturing is the typical sector where we can think on robots can be introduced. It has been declining since the mid-90s to the mid-2010s from over 20% to just 11%. Huge decline, somehow close to 50%, so halved, okay? So there's a clear destruction of employment in this type of sectors. At the same time, if you look at the stock of robots, it has boomed from about 5,000 to over 30,000 in this period. So it can be a connection from these two perspectives. Okay. Once shown that Spain can be a good example, we'll look at what type of data we have for Spain. Well, as in many other countries, we use applied data. We use social security records. This is called in Spanish muestra continua de vidas laborales. Okay, and this is an anonymized longitudinal panel for workers, collecting some 4% of the reference population, it's about 1 million workers, and we can trace them over the long life history. So any worker we know since they started to when they finished, for every core. We consider up to 15 waves of this survey from 2001 to 2016. Interestingly, we can say that, well, this period, it's a period in which the decline in employment in manufacturing and the increase of robots was substantial. So this is great for us. From this data, we can collect basic personal characteristics, and we have the detailed information for each working spell. What I mean working spell is that if you know that you start your new contract on the 1st of, let's say, February, maybe you end your fire, or this not a permanent contract, you're fired 3 months later, you know that characteristics of that spell, then you're out of the sample, and then you show up again maybe 6 months later with a new contract. We know the characteristics of every contract for every person and some personal characteristics. As for the robots, we work with some standard data. We bought that data set from the International Federation of Robots. This is based on surveys of robot suppliers, and it covers some 90% of the industrial robots market. And this information for robots is present for countries, sectors, or industries, and years in the period 93 to 2018, right? We have some information about here if you are interested in this, and we also do some balancing tests, and we have some descriptives. What is a robot? What is the description of a robot? Everything's in the paper, so if you're interested, we can provide some information. Okay, and this is probably the more important, not the more important, but a very important part of our work. What is the individual we are considering for our analysis? First, we only look at people who is fired. So we don't look at the entire population of workers. So we say we have 1 million workers every week. Okay, we don't look at that. We only look at those workers who have been fired. Okay? And, fired. We call it involuntary dismissals. There is a code in the data. It can be either you fire or there is a termination of the contract. We also only look at transitions to a different employer. So if you're fired because there is an end of demand and then you're out of the labor market, but then you're hired at the same firm 6 months later, well, we do not consider this, okay? Because this might be derived from change in demand, which can be temporary and not structural change because of the introduction of machine. We also exclude transitions to or from self-employment. Self-employment can be very tricky many times, and particularly we consider that it's very hard just to translate into other countries' experiences. So it affects the external validity of our results considering this type of jobs. Although we assume that this might be interesting, we consider this as a further research. We also drop very short spells. So if you're fired for 5 days, okay, we don't consider that. And we keep individuals within 18 to 60 years. We also trim and bottom, we trim top and bottom daily earnings, okay? Just to discard any problem associated with that. By the way, we consider wages coming from the base for paying taxes. So these are topped wages, okay? So up to a point that you can have normal wages, which actually it's not a problem because our main interests, as you will see later, are not higher earners but lower earners, which are the more affected by the robots introduction. Okay, before I move to the empirical approach, I will stop here just in case you have any doubt or any question coming from this description of the data. Because many times people is asking, well, but what about considering only people after 25? Because maybe you are studying, or we consider that. Okay, we also later you will see that we list a very last list of robustness checks. And for instance, one of these was considering only people aged 25 and older, just to avoid this type of problems associated with not considering, let's say, comparable people.
Vicente, are you considering people working in the manufacturing industries only? Because you were talking before about the employment share in manufacturing, or are you also considering services employees?
We consider everyone, yeah. Later, we do a robustness check only for manufacturing or excluding automotive, because this is, I will see later, I will show later, there is a vast diversity in sectoral, in the introduction of robots in different sectors. So we have to be very careful with that. But our initial approach is no, you can have any type of sectors. But yes, we consider this because, of course, this is important. It might be coming, all the results might be coming for a couple of sectors. So what? Okay, so.
Thank you.
Okay, so our empirical approach is this. So what is the outcome variable? The outcome variable is the quality of employment. How do we define the quality of employment? Well, in the past, very long past, I worked with this quality of employment. You can derive it from, for instance, from surveys such as job satisfaction, etc. But the job quality is usually measured by objective characteristics. Of course, we don't have this type of qualitative data or just satisfaction data. And what we look at is just work characteristics, including first, payment. Well, if you have two jobs, one with higher payment or the other lower payment, I mean, a higher one is good. It's better than the other one. So the first one is a dummy if your job offers a lower pay or a higher pay. Okay, we will deflect that. Okay, but just as a dummy, 1 or 0. The second one, rather than a dummy, we look at the ratio between the current one over the previous one. Okay, so it's just the one. First one is qualitative. If you go back in your career, and the second one is how much. A third indicator for job quality, it's about the qualification. There is a characteristic in the data looking at the type of qualification you have. So we sort it according to different characteristics, and we say, okay, this is higher qualification or demanding higher qualification or lower. There are many papers in Spain looking at the over-education. There is a very high level of over-education in Spain. We don't have education, but we do have this qualification. So we will look at jobs requiring a higher or lower qualification. Next, we also look at the type of contract. Spain is a country in which trade unions have been protecting permanent contracts or workers with a permanent contract. So the flexibility has been achieved with the introduction of temporary contracts. And there is a very high divide in the labor market between permanent and temporary contracts. Okay, so moving from a permanent contract to a temporary contract, we signal this as a bad job. And finally, if you cannot find not even a temporary contract, but your work is just related to a temporary employment agency, then well, you have a job. This is fine, but this is another signal that you're working with, or your new job is with a low quality. Okay, so we look at I, which will be the spell. W is the worker. S is for the sector. T, let me remember, T is for the dismissed, time of dismissal, and tau is the time of the new occupation. So we have two different periods of time. Okay, time of dismissal and time of the new occupation, and we control for both. And then we have a long list of controls. Well, we have individual characteristics, including age, gender, country of birth, weeks of employment, time, tau, etc. Year of re-employment, region, fixed effects, one-digit sector, fixed effects, type of the contract of the previous job. If you change your province, so before we refer to region, now we refer to provinces. If you change your sector, and two additional controls for globalization, let's say, change in import from China, and also for general technology change, so fixed capital formation volume in ICT equipment. We also add one vector, well, one vector is just the variable, which is workers' unobserved ability. This comes from a Minserian weight regression, in which we look at the earning of every worker against the list of characteristics. We take all the working history of every worker, and consequently we can say, okay, the wage of this worker might depend on their age, unemployment, or tenure, or any other characteristic. But if any specific dimension for the worker, so there's a fixed effects for the worker, which is not explained, but all of these issues, okay, this we label this as the as I said, this unobserved ability. So we control also for some personal characteristics which are not connected with anyone else, everything else, okay? And then our interest variable, which is the exposure to robots. We're not innovative at all in this variable, which is bad because this is not something new for the paper. So let's say the editors of the journal, they will say, but this is not new. Yeah, okay, but at least this is robust and we can trust this measure. How do we measure exposure to robots? As I said, we take in consideration the sector and the time. This is the information we have for Spain. So we have, as I said, this is time t, so the time of the dismissal, and this is exposure at t-1. And for the exposure in t-1, we consider the increase in robots one year or one period before. And we provide this in relative terms compared to the employment in sector S at the initial period, which is 1995. So by logging this, all these variables, and also just the denominator of this ratio, we somehow avoid a big share of endogeneity. Still, clearly, there can be some sort of lagging effects of this robot's introduction. And then we provide a second step for avoiding endogeneity, which is instrumenting this measure of exposure to robots by considering this ratio, considering data for Germany, Italy, France, and the United Kingdom. Okay. We also have some additional tries with some other countries in the data set, but I think this is reasonably good because we have some similar countries. So if we introduce here Korea, maybe Korea is not, I mean, it's okay, but it's not as close as these European countries to Spain. Finally, as for the adjustment mechanisms that I mentioned, which are two, remember, sectoral change and geographical change, we introduce in the equation, the previous equation I mentioned, just if the interaction between this measure of robot exposure and change in the province, so migration, and change in the sector. So these two interactions will provide us a way of capturing this adjustment mechanism, sectoral and geographical. Just some insights about how is the data, some descriptive. These are sectors. We have to work with just merging the industries because the data from the robots federations come from a particular classification and the data for workers come from a different classification. So we do our best with that. We are very careful. We provide a very detailed classification in the appendix of the paper. And well, this is the variation in terms of the ratio. As you can see, there is a sector with a large diversity, and 29 is automobile industry, which maybe you could also think in advance. Besides, we also have some of the sectors which are also mostly related to industrial sectors. And as for the variation by year, so this will be sectoral variability, we can see that there is sort of business cycle move. So the introduction of robots was much higher before the start of the Great Recession. During the Great Recession, it declined, and when the recovery started, just the introduction of robots climbed again, right? And let's go to the results. So what do we find? So let me first, so I don't have data with stars and so on. So with this graph, let me just mention just this first dot. This first dot is just the parameter for the robots exposure. So for this robots exposure, okay, the parameter is beta for one equation in which we just look at what happens to workers in sectors with higher intensity of the introduction of robots compared to workers with a lower intensity in the introduction of robots. Okay, so we put all the workers who have been just losing their job, and we do look at what if you lose your job in a sector which is with higher exposure or with a lower exposure. This is what we look at. Then we have two types of dots. One which is gray, and this is for the high-skilled workers. And then this is like sort of blue or black, I don't know. This is a middle and low skilled. For the high skill, we have close to 300,000 observations. And for the middle and low skilled, we have a million observations. Okay. 0, this red line, is just representing no significance. And the dot is just the point estimate of the beta parameter. This long line is just 99% confidence interval, and the one with the ticks is 95% confidence interval. Okay, and this is one regression for the high skill, another regression for the middle and low skill. So what do we find? First, for the high skilled workers, apparently there is no impact of robot exposure. So if you're a worker with 1% of higher robot exposure and you're high skill, well, you don't have a higher or lower probability of finding a job with a lower pay. Your new job, we don't know, but apparently it doesn't have any correlation with that. While if you are middle or low skilled, the probability of finding a job with a lower pay in a sector with a higher robot exposure is 2.4%. Okay, and it's significantly different from 0. This is how we are going to read every result. Now, what if we do the interaction? So this is a new regression with interaction for sector. Those who remain in the sector, those who have to change the sector. Okay. Interestingly, if you're high skilled, let's start with high skilled people. If you're high skilled and you're fired, but you manage to remain in your sector, the probability of lower pay is negative. So you managed to stay within the automobile. Maybe you were fired because of the interaction of robots, but you can find a new job within the same sector. That's fine. I mean, you can find a new job because this sector is improving this productivity, it's improving the outcomes, and it's very likely that you can find a new job. That's fine. While for those who are low to middle low skilled, I would say they're worse off. But what is interesting is if you cannot manage to stay within your sector, so you're exposed, and this expulsion is our interpretation, of course. But if you are exposed from your sector, you have to move to a different sector. Either if you're high skill or low skill, you will have a lower pay. Okay, so the reallocation. Well, if you manage to reallocate yourself within your sector, you don't have to transfer your skills to it because your skills are within the same sector. It's fine. Even if your middle low skill, I mean, this impact is negative, but so you have a lower pay. So, but this impact is quite low. While if you are exposed, it doesn't matter if you're high or low skilled. You have to transfer, or you have to find new skills in a new sector. It's likely that you have a lower pay. What about if the other mechanism? The other mechanisms apply for geographical mobility. Well, high skill, we don't find any significant result. While for the low skilled, it doesn't protect them at all. So even if you move through to a different region, you will be worse off. You will find a job with a lower pay. even though the point estimate is somehow higher for those who move from those who stay, they are not significantly different. Okay, but there is a point estimate which is higher for this. We have also the pay ratio, which is mimicking these results. I skip that. And as for lower qualification, we have very, very similar results with some exceptions. Okay. Lower qualification applies for the middle and low skills, and yeah, the big exception is that, well, apparently, no, this is okay in line. But yes, what we were finding is this not significant result for those who change the province and they are middle and low skilled. Apparently, it protects them from this lower quality in terms of qualification. We also look at temporary contracts or working for a temporary employment agency, and the results basically mimic one dimension, which is the fact that the people just managing to stay within the sector, just they are better off. Okay, and sometimes we also find some weird results, but clearly moving from a temporary to a temporary contract sometimes for the low skilled can be tricky. So most of the people are just being fired because they were already in a temporary contract. Any question before I move on? I mean, we have hundreds of results, so this is and the graphs will be more and more crowded in a minute. Yeah, this graph. What about this? This analysis considers, rather than the next job after you're fired. So let's say I'm fired today. I'm finding a new job in the summer. That's fine. So this is what we were considering. So from the previous job to the new one, the next one. Now what we do, because we have the overall history of workers, but we look at us, how are you 3 months after you were fired? Or 6 months after? At the bottom, you can see 3 months after, 6 months after, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years after you were fired. Okay? How is your pay? We will consider this medium-term analysis of these dismissals. As you can see, these let's say cold colors from dark to blue. These are for the high skills. These hot colors just from sort of red to yellow. This is for the middle and low skill. Again, middle and low skilled are worse off. High skills, they are in general okay. And in particular, if you're fired or if your contract is over, but you remain in your sector, you're in fact better. Okay. A big part of the dimension of this negative effect of exposure for people with this middle and low skills is coming because of being exposed from the sector. This is something that is repeated, but the type of data is completely different. So we don't look at just the next job because this might be short term. Well, if you look at a longer dimension of the data, we look at that. Again, we don't find that particularly different for the geographical classification. And probably there is some sort of increasing effect over time. But these are point estimates, and they are not significantly one to another. So I would not say that these 3 months to 36 months are significantly different, although clearly there is an increasing pattern in the point estimate of the robot exposure. So once you're fired from this type of jobs, you are significantly worse off over the longer term. As for lower qualification, the patterns looks very similar to what we saw before, and this applies also for temporary employment agencies, temporary contracts, and we have now something new to what we had before. Because before we were just looking at comparing previous jobs or contract, so against a new job. Now we look at, after 3 months, how many days have you been at work? Okay, or how many days have you been working? Sorry. Or if you have enjoyed unemployment benefits. And for the high skilled, again, nothing. And we see that there is a penalty in the short run, 3 to 6 months, okay, maybe a year if the significance level is lower to 95. But there is a short-term penalty in terms of the days of work, okay? While here again, we see that the possibility of unemployment with unemployed with benefits is just short-term, okay? We also look at the number of spells. Here it's again a penalty for those who have to change the sector. So if you're exposed from the sector, and this is the major mechanism of problems for the workers, and number of days works. Okay. Finally, we do a wide list of robustness checks. Only transitions from manufacturing. Exclude transitions from the automotive sector. For each individual, only transition from the longest spell. A different structure of fixed effects at the sectoral level. A more stringent definition of migration. So rather than moving to any other province, just to non-neighboring provinces, just to avoid any type of confusing with commuting, potential commuting. Also, we consider transitions from excluding the end of temporary contracts or looking at collective dismissals. But for collective dismissals, we only have 1,700 observations, which is very few. So finally, we have find nothing. Everything is not significant. So it's a pity, but we cannot say anything. And we also consider just different alternatives of skills groups rather than saying high versus the middle low skill. We considered up to 5 different categories of skills. Okay. So concluding, and I'm sorry if I devoted too much time for my explanation. We should the key point of the paper is shifting the focus of the paper from just employment levels or higher or lower employment just to say job quality. Okay. And we only look at people who lose their job. Next, we find lasting negative impact, particularly for the middle and low skilled workers. And on the other side, highly skilled workers might be less negatively affected by exposure, but they also find a penalty when they have to change the sector. Okay, this is one of the first graphs we presented. And workers who remain employed in the automating sectors benefit from its advantage. So you introduce job, if we introduce robots, this is good in general for the overall economy and also for the sectors because they earn more money. Okay, some workers who manage to stay there, they will benefit from these advantages. And as for the reallocation, finally, we see that this is not an effective adjustment mechanism from a welfare point of view. So, well, you can find a new job, yes, but I will be worse off. So what happens to me? Well, maybe from the policy point of view, we might need some additional active labor market policies for a smoother transition for these workers, okay? And I think that's all. Thank you so much. Liliana, correct me, please, if I said anything wrong, because it's very likely that it's so. So thank you so much.
Oh, thank you very much, Vicente and Liliana. Yeah, I was going to say that if Liliana was happy with the presentation by Vicente. Do we have any question? Any person? Yeah, I see Caroline.
Yeah, thanks, Raquel. That was really interesting. I found these results by whether you're changing the sector or not really interesting. And I was wondering whether you think that's an individual sort of effect or if that is a sector or firm effect. So what I mean is, I guess it's clear that it's preferable to stay in the same sector, both for high and low skilled workers, the outcomes are better. So if you're changing the sector, is that perhaps a signal that you weren't that productive in your previous sector to begin with, or is that a signal that that sector just completely doesn't exist anymore, or your job just doesn't exist anymore in the economy? Because I think that's also, from a policy perspective, that would be really interesting to understand, you know, if these jobs are disappearing, is it likely that people find jobs at other firms that are quite similar, or is it the thing that they have to change the sector? Is that something you can look into more?
So if I understand it well, you ask, okay, if we can distinguish between this mechanism. So if the firm adopts a robot and then you're better off, the firm is better off, and then you're fired because you're a bad worker. So you have to choose. You have good workers and bad workers, okay? And then of course you fire usually the worst one, but many times the cheap ones to fire, which is something also interesting. But still, this is one issue. And the second issue is, well, your firm didn't adapt. So the firm is just closing, and then just is this whole sector or just the whole firm, which is closing. As I said at the beginning, for us, this is something we cannot try to capture. We would have loved to have much more data for collective dismissals, because this would allow us just to look at these non-adopting firms. Let's say, if you fire from the firm, which is just have to hire a lot of people because of they are in trouble, we could be looking at this. But we have, out of 1 million people, we have just 1,700. So it's hard to say anything at all about that. All we can say is we control for a wide list of individual characteristics, including individual unobserved abilities, okay? And well, we don't know the characteristics of the firms as much as we have liked. So we don't know if these firms are actually introducing robots in their, they are adopting or not. All we do is just comparing people in some sectors against people in some or other sectors with different characteristics in terms of robots adoption. I would have liked just to answer you, but my feeling is that we cannot.
No, that's fine. Thank you. Still really interesting.
Any other question? Julia?
Thank you very much for a really interesting presentation. Yeah, learned a lot here. I was just wondering about in your estimate, because in your last slide, your last point was that there is an obviously an aptitude or some argument for having policy intervention to mitigate the fallout basically of automation. You know, I know, you know, having lived in Germany for a long time, being German, having lived in this country for a long time, I have a feeling I saw two extremes basically in you know, a government intervention, you know, the structural change and stuff like this. What is your sense? Where's Spain lying in relation to that? You know, where's Spain? Are they kind of more interested, or is a higher aptitude there to kind of mitigate these kind of fallouts of structure in industrial change, or is it more like, okay, let workers, you know, let just whole areas, you know, go into any deprivation? So I would be interested in hearing your point of view there.
Yeah, there is of course a big policy of related to these active labor market policies and trying to retrain workers just to move from one sector to another. And I would not say at all that this is for Spain, it is as successful than for many other countries. Let's say that way. Okay, so we have a policy usually managed by regions, so it's close to the local labor market, so they should be considering the local labor market characteristics, so they should be aware what are the needs of the employers in these local areas. But and of course there have been serious evaluations of these programs, and as far as I know, they are somehow successful, but not as much as they would like. So in many places, these training programs are just a justification for unemployment benefits. So if I am trained 6 months more, I can get 6 months of benefits more, so something like that. But there are serious concerns about these active labor market policies, and they are efforts from the national government and also regional governments, yes, to work hard with that, because it's really important. Okay, and I didn't mention that, but we have very serious reforms, labor market reforms, tried to include further flexibility in the labor market, okay, to fire people. And just during the Great Recession, the cost of dismissal was reduced, and a list of things happens. We consider that just in some sections of the paper, considering different periods of the. But we don't find very significant results with that. So my feeling is that this is something that for Spain, we still not. We need to work harder. Okay, although we are in the track. I don't know.
But I assume it is regional dependent, isn't it? In Spain, similar to because you have very strong regions, don't you? And it will be different in very, very different regions, wouldn't it?
Yeah. So, for instance, in Catalonia, you have you have Catalonia, you have the Basque Country, you have some regions which are very strong in terms of the introduction. So, industry in general, where robots adoption might be particularly important. And as far as I know, they have very good programs for active labor market policies, and I have some colleagues working in their evaluation. So, but still, they are not particularly happy. So, but this is not something Spanish only, I guess. So, this is something not easy.
Following up a bit with Julian, a very short question. I have other questions, but I will send you an email. I'm thinking about, like, I have done some work on job polarization, as you might know, for the case of the Netherlands. And we found that actually the rigidity of the labor market with regard to the high-tech or high-skill employees in comparison with low-skill employees was a bit different. So it was a bit more flexible in the case of only one part of the distribution of workers, while the others they seem to be more rigid. And I wonder if also that might have an influence or might have an effect on your results, because if you are in a more rigid market, for instance, in the case of high skill, where they are in more kind of traditional kind of job market, while the low skill they have more flexibility, it might be that the predisposition for changing jobs or after changing jobs is easier for one type of worker than another. So I don't know if you want to say something very quickly on that.
Well, we have not introduced any measure of rigidity of the labor market. In a parallel paper, I'm working with Raúl Ramos and Jordi Lopez. We are analyzing this wage curve parameter, okay, which can be a measure of rigidity of the labor market, let's say. And we see, as you mentioned, that in general, there is a wide rigidity in many labor markets. So even if you have high unemployment, I mean, you'll find no response in terms of wages, okay, in many occasions from a local perspective. But we have not did this analysis. We didn't do this analysis for high versus low skill. So I cannot say anything about that. But yes, from this perspective, Spain is a quite rigid market. Still, my feeling is that, and correct me, Liliana, if I'm wrong, but my feeling is that the mechanisms driving our results are basically related with the transferability of your skills.
Yeah.
Okay. So
how resilient you are in the labor market.
Yeah, maybe you can say that, but let's say, I don't know, if you're high skilled, okay, maybe your knowledge, your skills might be transferable from manufacturing to another industry. Or if you're low skilled and you have been in a job for 10 years and you have nothing but your experience and you have to move to a different sector, I mean, you have nothing to transfer. So this sectoral rigidity, I think it's very important, much more than the one associated with the labor market regulations. Mm-hmm. This is my feeling, but I cannot say nothing else about this high versus low skill rigidity that you mentioned, because I'm not fully aware of this for Spain.
Okay. Okay, so I cannot see any more question or comments. So
maybe Liliana wants to answer any of them.
I think she's hesitating to do that. Just to say thank you very much to both of you to present this very, very interesting and exciting research. I think that also everybody was saying in the chat that it links very much with some work that has been developed also at the Institute. So I think everybody has enjoyed this presentation, and thank you very much to accept this invitation. And for everybody, just to say that in 2 weeks we are going to have another seminar. Maybe Caroline can help me on that.
Yes, we do, at the same time, Wednesdays at 1 p.m. London time, and we will have George Lee from the LSE talking about conflict minerals, I think, and international supply chains.
Okay, so we will see each other here again. So thank you very much and have a good afternoon.